Oh, that was a big bite. Hey, homesteaders, gardeners. So the recipe I'm making today is from 2 peas in a pod. I'll put a link to it down below. And it calls for a couple of different kinds of cheddar. And honestly, you can make mac and cheese with almost any kind of hard cheese. It's not super critical that it be one specific variety. So I'm just gonna go with what I happen to have in my fridge right now. But I am gonna do 2 different kinds of cheese. And so what I have here is a block of cheddar and a block of Monterey pepper jack. And I need a cup of each, and a cup of cheese, if it's a hard cheese like this, is about 4 ounces. So I need about 4 ounces each, or 8 ounces total. And as I mentioned in one of my other videos, I can't remember which one it is right now, 8.5 or over a half an ounce. I'm not gonna worry about that. The best way to keep your cheese from molding in your fridge is to not touch the parts that are gonna go back in the fridge and keeping it wrapped. So if you can keep your cheese in either the container it came in, or in a plastic bag, or in some wax cheese cloth or whatever, but keep your fingers off of it. That's the biggest thing, because when your fingers touch that cheese, your fingers have always got something on it, because we touch everything all the time, as we all know from COVID, and that will cause that spot to mold inevitably. I almost never throw out cheese anymore. It's literally been years. Occasionally I'll have to cut a little piece off, but almost never, and I often will have cheese in the fridge that has been opened for a month. So it really makes a huge difference if you just keep things in some kind of an airtight container, and also keep your fingers off of it. All right, got my cheese grated up. I really hate hand grating cheese, and so if I have to do more than about a cup, I just use my food processor. That's totally a financial and personal preference. Sometimes getting a food processor dirty and having to clean it is worse than doing something by hand. I totally get that. We've got our 2 cups of cheese. All right, we're gonna get some water going for the macaroni. Pasta water needs a good amount of salt. I roasted this butternut earlier. It was quite large. The recipe calls for half of a medium. I'm gonna fudge a little bit, but I'm not gonna use all of this. I'm probably gonna use about half. So we'll just kind of eyeball this. And what I'm doing here is we roasted this to give it a nice roasty, caramelized, sweet flavor to add to the pasta. Honestly, you could probably bake it and it would be fine. This is just adding another layer of flavor, but it's certainly not critical. We're gonna try to keep this from falling off the table with our hip here. We'll just freeze this and use it for something else later. I need a half a cup of milk. I actually need more than a half a cup, but this is just for this portion. And I'm gonna blitz this and then add the milk to loosen it up a little bit. And this is the same food processor I just ground my cheese in. I certainly don't care if there's some cheese flavor in there, so we're just gonna not clean it between uses here. Yeah, a little on the chunky side. The bottom of my food processor is broken. I need to order a new bowl, and if I hold it in place, it works. So I'm just making do because I'm contemplating just buying a new food processor altogether. My husband is nodding along. I'm actually talking to the camera and not to him, but it's sweet that he's participating.
I'm participating.
That looks pretty good. I'm okay if there's a little bit of chunk in there, so I'm not worried about it. All right, in our good-sized pan, I need 2 tablespoons of butter. And what we're doing here, and this is how most mac and cheese is made, is we're making a roux. And a roux is just butter and flour that has been cooked together. And a roux has really good thickening power. And so we're making a cheese sauce, but almost all cheese sauces start with a roux. And so that is what we're doing. This is not complicated. This is one of those things where people buy boxed mac and cheese. And once you understand how to make mac and cheese on your own, it is so easy. It is really not necessary for you to buy boxed mac and cheese with all of those ingredients you can't pronounce in it. You absolutely can make it at home. We're gonna need 2 more cups of milk. I am using 2%. You can use whatever you like, depending on how rich you want it. And then I'm gonna need, to make this roux, I'm gonna need 3 teaspoons of all-purpose flour. If you are gluten intolerant, you probably know more about it than I do, but I'm pretty sure that you could use cornstarch or tapioca starch or potato starch or something else and get the same approximate thickening powder. Hi, buddy. What you doing? Hi. 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 So once our butter is melted, we're gonna add in that flour. And you wanna spread it out because it's gonna tend to wanna clump. And it's a lot easier to handle if you spread it a bit. And we're just gonna cook that together with the butter. Long enough that there's no dry clumps anymore. And for probably about a minute, just long enough to kind of bake off any of that raw flavor. Let that butter toast a bit, let that flour toast a bit. That's gonna give you a nice flavor. You don't wanna go too long, you can burn this, but about a minute is about right. And you can smell as this is cooking. It does get kind of a nice nutty smell to it. So you can use your nose as well as your eyes to determine when this has gone long enough. All right, our butter's looking good. We're gonna whisk in 2 cups of milk. And it's gonna look terrible and then it will smooth out, so don't panic. You want to go slow at the beginning, and then you can, once you get about halfway there, you can dump the rest in. So all those little floury starch granules are gonna make a nice mesh in here. I'm gonna let that come to a simmer. Milk is not one of those products you want to turn your back on when it's on the stove for any length of time. It goes from not simmering to boiling over in about 30 seconds. There we go. Stir this as it thickens. You see how the consistency of that has changed? We're going to add in our butternut and stir that in. We're going to slowly work this in. That is some thick stuff. Imagine this would probably be delightful just as on its own. All right, we're going to add in a teaspoon and a half of dried rosemary. You can use fresh if you have it. The original recipe calls for fresh. We're going to do a little bit of fresh ground nutmeg, which just goes super well with all things cream and all things cheese. And you could just use pre-ground. I happen to have this, and so I might as well dig it out on occasion. Try not to drop the nutmeg into your pot. It's a super easy thing to do. You want just 1/8 of a teaspoon, so just a little pinch. All right, our water's boiling for our pasta, so I'm going to get that going. And that's a 1/2 pound. I'm assuming you guys have all made pasta before, but the real trick is to stir it right away and then come back and stir it about a minute in. And that makes all the difference in terms of stuff not sticking together. Fresh ground black pepper in this would be welcome, although there is pepper on the squash when we baked it. And her recipe calls for layering, like stirring in the macaroni here and then layering the cheese and then baking it. I'm just going to do this in one pot rather than try to do a bunch of layering stuff. So I'm going to basically make a cheese sauce in this pot. And that means I'm just going to start adding cheese. And you want to do this a handful at a time. And stir it until it's melted. And we probably could have done this before we added the squash as well, but it should work either way. See how that's just completely disappeared? That's what you want. If you dump it all in at once, it can really bring down the temperature quickly and you end up with a big giant melty wad that isn't dispersing into the mix. So having that handful at a time, it's fiddly, but it really does make a difference. That's looking good. This is going to taste delightful. And we're going to have a little bit of chili flavor from that pepper jack. But we like a little pepper, so I think we're going to be fine with that. I imagine this would be very good with like a Swiss or a Gruyere as well, because those go really well with squash. Fontina would be good. lots of different cheese options. I think mozzarella would be too stringy. I don't think you could get an easy, good cream sauce with mozzarella. I wouldn't go there. I actually had some mozzarella in my fridge and thought, nah. All right, I need to re-stir this. Thankfully they're little and so they come apart pretty easily. That was a little more than a minute, but thankfully it's pretty forgiving. And I have my heat totally off right now just because this is so thick that I'm a little bit concerned that it's gonna burn on the bottom if I'm not stirring it constantly. So I just thought I'd melt the cheese in here without having the heat on, and it seems to be working just fine. So there you go. There's 2 cups of cheese mixed in to our beautiful squash. And if you were making this without the squash, you would just leave the squash out and you'd have a nice cheese sauce, and then you would add your noodles and ta-da, you have mac and cheese. Trying to make sure there aren't any pockets of pasta on the bottom that don't have any cheese mixed in. So that's it. It's done. One of the things that makes homemade mac and cheese often better than stuff out of a package is you can do toppings. And a little bit of a topping just gives that extra texture when everything in here is kind of mush. And so having a little bit of crunch is really lovely. And so what I'm going to do is sprinkle some breadcrumbs on this. The original recipe did call for breadcrumbs, but it also called for baking in the oven. I don't think we need to go there. We're just going to serve it up like this. But I am going to put some breadcrumb topping on the top of this and then just throw it under the broiler in my toaster oven for a few minutes and let that get a little bit crisped up. It's going to give us a nice flavor. And I probably put way more squash in there than was really necessary. So this is super thick. These breadcrumbs are a mix of store-bought, but also whenever I have like a half a loaf of bread left over that is gonna go stale, I will sometimes just throw it in a food processor and then throw it on a cookie sheet and dry it out and make my own breadcrumbs. And then throw in Italian seasonings in there if I want it. So you can make your own breadcrumbs very easily. And if they're fully dry, they will keep forever. And so I buy this, but mostly I just refill it with my own. If you want to get real fancy, you can make fresh breadcrumbs that are buttered. And those are really lovely and delicious, but we're not doing fancy tonight. We're doing weeknight dinner. All right, we're gonna broil that. Yeah, see what, 4 minutes. Usually you can smell the breadcrumbs and that's when you check it. So do it that way. Let's see how these look. Yeah, it's about right. So there you have it. Butternut squash mac and cheese, full of great vitamins. Great way to use up your winter storage squash. And of course, super yummy. If you have kids, they might not even know the squash is in there. Quick, once you've got the squash roasted, the whole thing comes together in less than 15 minutes. So a really nice weeknight meal. Give it a try. Thanks for watching, Tribe. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Drop me a comment and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I have new videos coming out every week.